today's forum. We're going to get started with a presentation from President Patty Newhold Ravi Kumar. Following that, we'll have a Q&A session that you can participate in by looking at the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can submit your questions throughout the presentation. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to the president.
Good morning, Deirdre, and good morning, campus. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to make a quick apology to you for the scratchy throat and the throat lozenge that will be in my mouth while I'm speaking to you. It's the only way I can guarantee I have a shot at making through this without having a sputter. So please forgive me. Thank you for your time this morning. Well, as you've been informed throughout the year, our budget depends on a number of factors. We've talked about what happens inside the institution and how that impacts our budget. But we also had a few key factors outside of the institution that we needed to wait to learn about. The legislature's decision about what to do with that revenue. We also have our census numbers, and a few other pieces of data that we've been waiting for. So we believe at this point that higher education, and therefore UCO, will receive a flat budget from the legislature this coming year. And this means that at this point, we do not expect a reduction in our state appropriations. Now, of course, the legislature is still meeting, the session's still open, so technically anything can happen, but as of right now, all signals are flashing green, and we believe we are comfortable building a budget on this expectation at this time. Our spring enrollment census number came in under budget. As many of you already know, until we have summer in the books, it appears likely that we will not make budget for FY22, which means we have a little bit of a shortfall that we're creating again this year. But as we've shared before, any shortfall created in one budget year will need to be addressed in the following year. And so I want you to know that our student success and enrollment and college teams are working diligently to positively impact those numbers and to help us finish strong this year and give us a good, strong start to next year. I mentioned these reminders to you right now to make sure that you all understand that the numbers that we've presented to you throughout the year and that we'll present to you today are our best projections based on what we know right now. Our hope is that focused and creative work across the university will result in better enrollment. So today I want to share with you the approach that we've identified to implement, which is intended to bring about swift resolution to our budget deficit. So I will start by sharing our first recommendation for our approach. And that is, there we go. It's not moving forward. And that is a change in our carryover budget practice to address a large portion of the structural deficit by only budgeting what is expected to be spent on non-recurring expenditures. So this is one that we spent quite a bit of time, and it's specifically shared information and explanation with the senates on campus to make sure people understand what we meant by this. But this relieves the expectation to make one-time money a permanent part of the budget, which is what we've been doing year over year. And we're trying to remove one-time money that we do not intend to spend from the budget. And so the other thing that this does is it encourages planned spending of accumulated funds. So if we've accumulated funds that we've charged for a reason, let's have plans and implement those plans to spend that money appropriately and swiftly. This money will still be visible. We will still be accountable for this money. It simply will not be in our expected expenditures. As of right now, and there's still a whole quarter left to this fiscal year, our colleges are projecting that we will have about $8 million in carryover at the end of the year to bring into the next fiscal year. We are going to structurally remove that and only bring back in what is expected to be spent. Our second part of this approach is to add an academic service fee. And we don't take this lightly, much like we don't take tuition increases lightly. But we believe an academic service fee can help reduce the number of faculty positions that might be eliminated due to budget constraints. We want to continue to support the classrooms as best we can. And so we can use these funds for any instructional expenses that we need in order to keep those classrooms going. And it could produce, depending on enrollment, up to $2 million next year in recurring revenue, not one time, but recurring revenue that could offset that deficit. Of course, if enrollment is better, it could produce more. If enrollment is less, it will produce less. And so this is, of course, an estimate, but we are hopeful that this can help soften any of the impact that budget constraints might cause on our academic affairs efforts. So if academic affairs had been asked to identify a certain amount of money to cut from their budget, this $2 million would have been able to soften that. And so this is a proactive measure to make sure that we're doing everything we can to create some support, structural support for those services. I do want to reassure you that we have discussed this. Several of the vice presidents sat down with UCOSA leadership recently and talked through this, answered questions, and this is the first time something like this has been done in recent histories. And so this is a very direct conversation, allowing Q&A, and we wanted to make sure that the student body had time to digest that. So it has been discussed with them. So what I want to talk to you about now is a new issue that has come up and been called to our attention this year. So I'm gonna pull over here, and I'm gonna talk about this one before I share the final part of our approach, because this issue will be addressed for a different reason other than our budget deficit, but it will impact our budget deficit. So I felt like it is very relevant to talk about at this point. Having listened to our Russo regents throughout the year, it has become evident that our student to faculty ratio is a relevant measure of concern, and it needs to be increased. So when I talk about student to faculty ratio, I don't know how many of you follow this number or understand this number, and so I will simply pause for a moment to say that this represents a direct connection between enrollment and our classrooms. This gives us an idea of the changes that we see in our student and faculty headcounts based on what constitutes full-time attendance and full-time workload. So with the calculation that is performed every year, our institutional research team calculates the full-time value of all of our part-time faculty and figures what that equals in our total full-time equivalent faculty number, which includes our regular full-time faculty. And the similar measure is done for our student headcount as well. We look at this as a very direct connection and a measure that we've watched, but we have not used in this way before. And so this is a new thing for the institution. It's a new thing for our system. And so I just want to walk through this and make sure we all understand what this means. I've mentioned a couple of variables, so let's just talk about those for a minute. Why does it need to be improved is probably the question burning in your mind. So let's just take full-time equivalent faculty. That's what FTEF stands for. Between fall of 2014 and fall of 2020, our full-time equivalent faculty count increased by 1.6%. It had some ups and downs during that time, but if you look across that span, it's 1.6% increase. Now, if you look at our full-time equivalent student headcount, we have decreased by 17.7% from 14 to 20. When you take these two measures together, with those two trends heading in opposite directions, we have had a significant 20% decrease in our student to faculty ratio. You might ask about the 18 faculty lines that we sacrificed last year, or for this year. And because data, of course, is always a year in lag, those numbers have been taken into account outside of this. But I will tell you, although it did positively impact our FTE faculty, that number was lost. That impact was lost due to the drop in enrollment. Had we not had a drop in enrollment, that would have made a much bigger impact. I say all this to tell you that a 20% decrease is simply not sustainable today. It's not only a measure of concern, but it is one that needs our attention. And so, as you can imagine, when you look at FTE student and FTE faculty, there are two ways that you can influence this ratio, that we can influence it in order to improve it for our situation. And that is, we can increase student enrollment, or we can decrease faculty headcount. And I can tell you that we, like hundreds of other institutions in the country, are battling a decline in demographic. We are battling a decline in higher education enrollment interest. And certain institutions are being squeezed more than others. And those are institutions much like ours. We're not a community college, nor are we a research institution, nor are we an elite Ivy League school. And when schools at the research level and the Ivy League level have the ability to open and close a spigot of enrollment by lowering or changing their enrollment standards, admission standards, they have the power to influence our enrollment. So the good work of our colleges and our recruiters, our admissions, our enrollments, our student success folks, our faculty, our staff, all across campus, are all of that work is relevant and important and worthy and something that we should continue to do. It's been frustrating to see the impact that we've had based on everything else that's happening around us. But we can't lose hope. We have to continue to put effort and energy into those things. But after years of seeing this decline and using cash to defray this impact, we are left with the unenviable option of needing to decrease faculty headcount. Our data tells us that we're using fewer adjuncts to teach sections, and our full-time faculty have taught more sections. Simultaneously, we're not hearing any anecdotal evidence that this reduction in FTE faculty is hampering our students' abilities to find the sections that they need. Our colleges worked to level the course load after we lost 18 faculty lines this year. And that same energy, along with the energy of our advisement and enrollment teams, will be critical to helping our students map their path that takes advantage of the sections that are available to them and make sure to keep them on track to graduation. Now, this is not a new effort, right? This is what colleges and student success teams do all year long. However, this effort now has new emphasis, urgency, and interest from our regents. By increasing the student-to-faculty ratio, we do have the power to build a budget that can stand on its own without the crutch of cash and begin to take advantage of opportunities that are presented to us. Opportunities that we've had to allow to pass us by because we have not had the cash free, the funds free, to be able to invest in those things, take advantage of them. We will not squander that opportunity going forward. And so we will be making changes to our budget for FY23 that include measures to increase our full-time equivalent faculty to student ratio to 17:1. So there's a lot to take in on this next slide. So let's go through it together, okay? We are moving from 15:1 to 17:1. This is not an easy undertaking for any institution. But the impact of this means that we will have a reduction of 40 plus full-time equivalent faculty lines for next year's budget. There are several ways that we intend to approach this. Not all of those approaches are going to be listed here because there will be creative thought and strategic maneuvers inside of the colleges to make these things work effectively. But the first thing is we're going to eliminate vacant faculty lines before filled ones. That's our commitment to you. At this point, we have 18 vacant lines identified. And as you know, more vacancies may come, retirements, resignations, we just don't know. And so again, with a quarter left in the year, we have to leave some room for the unexpected. We will also eliminate positions associated with consistently low enrollment academic programs. Those aren't programs that simply have had a dip. Those aren't programs that just got started and haven't had time to prove themselves. These are programs that we've been watching for quite some time. And at this point, we now have the impetus to sunset them. Other things that we will do will be to optimize full-time faculty available capacity, as we have done already, and to use adjuncts strategically, as we have done and will continue to do. In addition to these measures, we may need to explore new ways to do our scheduling, or new delivery modes, or instructional management, in order to make the absolute most of what we have for the benefit of our students. Coming from a background of running a family business, I need you to know that I take my commitment to each of you very personally. This ratio, this number, represents people. It represents people I know. It represents people you know. And we should never lose sight of that. And although I need to put it in writing and put it on a screen for you to see, it can get lost in the mechanics of a PowerPoint. And so I want you to know that we are focused on the very real impact that this will have on so many in our community. Any job reduction for me is heart-wrenching because I know from personal experience the impact that may have on you. I want to assure you that our provost and her team, our college deans and their teams, are wrestling with the weight of this task as well. And they are approaching this very thoughtfully. Just as Provost Simmons has demonstrated previously, the process going forward will be holistic and collective. So, if you look at the two parts that I mentioned earlier, and I add this new imperative, we believe we have what constitutes the possibility to make a significant positive impact on our budget deficit in a rather short amount of time. This is just to summarize what we've already said, but to see it all together, to know that these are the three things that are being discussed, the three things that are being worked on right now. And we're curious to know how this impacts areas, budgets, people. So we are considering those things as we go through this and being very thoughtful in our discussions. You might ask, what happens if all of this is enough? I think that's a fair question. What happens if this isn't enough? Well, our backup option, as it has been, unfortunately, our leading option for the last several years, has been to use regular or more familiar operating budget cuts. Those are the ones that have a lot of you operating on half the budget that you had 5 years ago. A lot of you operating on budgets that you are borrowing from other people right now. And so this has been pushed as a backup option as opposed to a leading option. It's also been asked if we've considered other options, and the answer is yes, of course we have. And the ones that we shared with you here are the ones that have risen to the top of our consideration and make the most sense for where we are. But I'll tell you, as we look forward, next year, we will be exploring a retirement incentive program. And I was asked specifically about that this year. And I want you to know that it's not something that we're doing this year because it requires a commitment of cash from the institution. And until we know what the impact of enrollment is and what the impact of this change in faculty to student ratio is, we don't know how much cash we need. And so we're going to have to wait. We don't want to overcommit cash. So we're going to wait and do this next year. So I'm giving you that advance notice now. So if this is something that you are considering doing in the next year or 2 years, this might be an opportunity for you to consider doing that a little bit earlier than you thought. Again, we're going to start exploring that in the new year, and we'll have more details for you as it comes up. But it will be done in a way that allows people to plan for the end of the year. It's important for you all to keep in mind that all of these numbers and this scenario and these approaches are based on the assumption of flat enrollment. That means we are building the assumption that enrollment will stabilize. If enrollment doesn't stabilize, if it drops a little further, we're going to have to adjust. And I think that is part of our new normal, just making plans to be flexible and agile and adjust. So where do we build in that ability to adjust with as little negative impact to our people and our students as possible? So this brings us to the end of my presentation. I want to make sure that we left enough time for you to have questions. But I'm going to go ahead and put this up on the screen because we want you to be able to offer feedback on the content that you've heard today. You can snap a picture of that QR code and do that online. You can also take the opportunity, as Deirdre mentioned at the beginning of this session, to enter your questions for her to be able to pose to me. And I'll be happy to answer those as time allows. But this link is going to be up until Monday at 5 p.m. So please take the opportunity to share your feedback there. Again, we're asking for your feedback on today's content. I know there's a lot of moving parts to what's going on, but we do ask that you focus on what we've shared with you today so that we can better bracket the kind of information and data that you'll share with us so that we can make sense of it. Your feedback will be reviewed next week. So just know that what you say does count and is being heard. And thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Deirdre.
Thank you, President. We do have several questions lined up. Several of them are regards to the academic service fee. What was the feedback from UCOSA, and who was part of the discussions in relation to that fee?
Sure. So all of the UCOSA Executive Committee was in that meeting. I meet with them monthly and monthly throughout the spring and spring and fall semesters. So all of the UCOSA Executive Committee was there. In addition, they met with Cole Stanley, AVP for Student Success and the Student Affairs, with me, with the Provost, with Vice President for Enrollment and Student Success, and with the Vice President for Finance and Operations. So this was a unique and new approach to be able to share this information directly face-to-face with students and allow their leadership to ask questions and to understand the impact. So we were glad to do that. The response was positive. They were inquisitive, and no student is happy to see fees go up, so I'm not going to tell you that. But I will tell you they were understanding, and they appreciated the fact that it was focused on instructional expenses.
Also regarding the academic service fee, we have a couple of questions about how it will be used and what the cost will be and how that will be calculated.
Sure. So as I said, it will be used for instructional expenses, and that has been left in the broad category of instructional expenses because our deans and our provost will need to determine how best and how effectively to use those funds, whether that is for rank promotion, whether that is for direct needs, physical needs in the classroom, whatever it takes to support our classrooms, that would be a source of funding for those efforts. And then what was the second part of that question, Deirdre?
What's the cost on that fee and how will it be calculated? Credit per person.
Thank you. So we have submitted a request for that fee to be up to $6.82 a credit hour. And that will be an additional fee, possibly an increase on a fee. I'm not quite sure the mechanics behind it, but $6.82, which is where we're getting that $2 million estimate. If we have about 300,000 credit hours next year, that's how that will be calculated, and it will be collected similarly to the transformative learning fee that Academic Affairs collects.
We also have a question in relation to how this fee will support academic affairs. Is there any mechanism to support ESS?
So again, I want to say it's tied to instructional expenses, and I'm going to ask our leaders to help determine what that is and lead us in the right direction. We're providing that opportunity for us. So if we're talking about instructional expenses, it's what it takes to support instruction. That's all the information I have at this point. And if there are specific expenses that are going to be attributed to that, then we'll learn those as we develop the budget more fully. I wish I could give you more at the moment. I don't have more at the moment.
We have a few questions in relation to the ratio you discussed. Does that ratio include faculty who serve in administrative positions?
Okay, so you're stepping a little off of the path where I trod normally. So if the provost is with us this morning and has opportunity to speak in at this moment, I would ask her if she would like to respond to that question.
Yes. Thank you, President. To my knowledge, the administrative roles, no administrative roles are included in that ratio. It truly is a faculty-student ratio. So it measures full-time faculty and it measures full-time students. And then there, as the President alluded to earlier, there is a way to incorporate the part-time faculty and the part-time students. So it does include adjuncts, but there's no administrative, the chairs, department chairs count in that, but nobody who's classified as full-time administration. So no staff members are impacted in that particular ratio.
We'll take a break for a second. You can continue to put your questions in the Q&A we're going through. We have quite a few that have come in and we're sorting through them and trying to get through as many as we can. So continue to ask and know that your question will get to as many as we possibly can.
My apologies. Coughing fit. I'm back.
Just to circle back to the academic service fee, was Faculty Senate, were they a part of the discussions on that fee?
Kevin, can you field that while I continue to choke?
So to my knowledge, that fee was not discussed directly with Faculty Senate prior to us submitting it for approval. Right now, that academic service fee has just been submitted for approval to both our board and to the state regents. So we're still awaiting approval on that, but that was done, I believe, at near the end of February.
And I'll just add to that, if I can, so sorry everybody, that we have a deadline to meet in order to submit those fees, that if we don't submit it by that deadline, we cannot charge that in the next year. So if we decide to not charge this, we can do that. If we decide we need to charge a lesser amount, we may be able to adjust that. But this was our one opportunity to put that in. And so it's in there as a placeholder, but that's why we're here talking with the campus to share that information.
Okay, we have a question about how this will affect campus. Will all departments, all programs, all colleges be affected?
I'm going to ask the provost to step back in because I I believe that feels more pertinent to the colleges at this point. But I'm happy to answer what I can. So, Provost?
Thank you, President. Yes, this will impact, within academic affairs, this will impact all of our academic departments because we're talking about faculty lines. And again, I want to reiterate that nothing that we do with a staff line, whether it be administrative or otherwise, nothing that we do with a staff line will impact the ratio that the president has described. So the only way and our charge to our division that our president has described as one of the possibilities is a reduction of 40 plus faculty lines. So we're not talking about staff, we're talking about faculty, full-time faculty lines. Given that, our approach will be to follow the process that we have set out. To remind you all, I know in this moment that you are, there's a lot of emotions that you are feeling right now. And I can tell you that your leadership, your academic leadership is feeling every single one of those. And, but I just want to walk through some things that we know and how we're going to proceed. So I felt like Paul Revere at times, dating back to AVP Stewart and I, when we began to talk to you now a couple of years ago about the idea that faculty cuts, we believed, looking at the situation, that faculty cuts were imminent. And so probably at sometimes over this past couple of years, you have felt some days look better than others, and you probably have felt that I was the town crier, cuts are coming. But I've believed that since for the last couple of years, and we have tried to work accordingly to prepare for that. So our team, of course, as the president has also alluded to, we cut 18 vacant, and I'm going to emphasize vacant faculty lines last spring. The fact that they were vacant did not mean that they came without pain, because there were temporaries in those lines that didn't come back with us this year, at least not in a full-time capacity. Those that were part of it, and ultimately there were many discussions at the faculty level, at the departmental level, at the college level, and then ultimately a group of 34 people from across the leadership. So the academic affairs leadership teams, the deans, the associate deans, the assistant deans, the AVPs, the faculty senate executive board, which included AUP members. All of those people weighed in, and in the end, we had a consensus of the 18 positions that we wanted to put forward for our cut. We have, since June, been preparing for what lies ahead of us, even though we didn't know the magnitude of what that was going to look like. So there have been ongoing conversations since June now of looking at all possible data available from the quantitative side, trying to understand how to interpret that at the qualitative side, and then putting together an examination of all of our programs and to try to understand better where we are and where we want to go, what programs have potential to grow, what programs need to change, what programs, as the president said, may be consistently underperforming. So we have a lot of information that we have been working on en masse. If you're a faculty member and you haven't been part of that, you should have been, and you need to be asking questions of your department chairperson or your school director as to more involvement. But my hope is that all of this planning does not come as a surprise to any of you. So now is the time we're going to use that. We're going to convene this large group that mimics what we had last year. This group is not going to be surprised because they've been in discussions with us also in the fall semester a couple of times. This will consist of our again, our deans, our associate deans, our assistant deans, our AVPs, our faculty senate executive board, our AUP president, they have all been part of this group. They will be part of this group. They will be invited next week to come to a session and to bring, we're just going to start by looking at all the things that we've learned, all the things that we've done. As the president has said, what your deans have done in grueling process that included your department chairs and school directors, and hopefully feedback from you as the faculty. They've already made the very, very difficult decision of sorting through the positions that we know we have. We have at this point 34 vacant positions that we looked at, and they made the grueling decision of 18 of those, which will be eliminated as the first 18 towards this 40. The others, they deemed as, at least on first pass, we need to hold on to these and look at these again, because there are aspects of accreditation and other endangerment to programs or majors that make these not so easy to put on the table. None of these are easy to put on the table, but some of them are more critical than others. So what I can tell you is what I said to you when I put my name in for provost. I will do everything in my power. And the team that I've assembled, I think all of you can look at your college deans and their teams, my AVPs, and know that these are people who care about you. You can see from the people that I chose that I care about you, because I picked people to lead you that care about you. These will be the people making these decisions, helping us make these decisions with your input. So I can guarantee you that I will do the very best that I can to have the highest level of shared governance, transparency, communication, and integrity within our division as we try to move forward on this humongous task that has been put before us. I can assure you that I am well versed in the faculty handbook as well as Russo policy, and any recommendation that comes forward from our division will be in alignment with that. And I also encourage you, the feedback for today's content is still on the screen. Provide us with that. I have said to you from the beginning, I want to hear from the faculty through your department chairs, through your school directors, through your deans, but I also want to hear from you through the faculty senate. I also want to hear from you, and our cabinet wants to hear from you with this feedback as to how you're reacting today. Thank you, President.
All right, we have quite a few questions in the same topic of what other areas have been looked at for potential cuts. Things that have mentioned include staff, administration, athletics, specific programs. Can you give a little bit of a summary of those different areas and how they were looked at?
I will do my best. Again, pardon me for my interruptions there. So throughout the course of the year, almost anything and everything can come to the table and be talked about. That doesn't mean it's considered as something that we are going to move forward with, but we discussed quite a few things. And the ones that you just recently mentioned, that I'm sure are coming from the questions, are the ones that always come to the table. Unfortunately, we are faced with only two things to move a student to faculty ratio. And so when we look at student to faculty ratio and the impact that that has, what we have chosen to do is let's see what that does first before we keep cutting all over the place. We have reduced operational budgets across the institution for years. We've reduced staff positions across the institution for years. And at this point, we know we have interest from the regents to increase and improve our student to faculty ratio. So we are pausing there, and we are going to see what moving to 17 to 1 means for us. And I'm sure 17 to 1 is not a dartboard. That is a number that has been mentioned in conversations with our regents at different times. And so that 17 to 1 is something that you'll see pretty common across our metro peers. You'll also see that common across state peers. I also have some other peers in, the Coalition for Urban and Metropolitan Universities. So 17 to 1 is a fairly common, I can't say average because I haven't done the research on that, but it's an extremely common number. I will tell you that the number of 15 to 1 typically has raised an eyebrow with any president or colleague that I've talked to in this same field. 15 to 1 is an area where most of them have said, well, that would bring me some concern. We'd be looking at that pretty intensely if that were happening at our institution. So 17 to 1 is a healthy place for us to move toward. I can tell you that even in passing conversations with our regents, higher numbers were mentioned. And so not mentioned as a directive, but as why not? And so when we explain those things to them, they understand, but they also are very curious as to why this moves the way it does. And it seems to be correlated to a couple of things, like what's happening in the classrooms. So I think that answers your question, maybe a little bit more. But we've chosen these first two things because we know moving these things off of the budget that we don't intend to spend was an easy one to do. That was just a no-brainer, in my opinion, to move it off. The other one of a fee. So we talked to students about that because they're the ones who are going to be paying it. We wanted to make sure that if we even considered this, if we even went forward, that it's something that they knew about, that they wouldn't be surprised by. They understood the scope of it. And so when they're the ones who are paying it, that's why we started with them. This is our opportunity to talk to our faculty and our staff about that same thing. I believe we owed it to our students who are going to be paying that fee to get their feedback initially. If we had received different kind of feedback, we might be on a different path today. Here we are, and we're wanting to gather your feedback on that and help us navigate how we get through this.
We have quite a few questions in the topic of how will people find out if they're losing their jobs? What's the timeline on that? And will there be a severance package? And what would that maybe look like?
Provost Simmons, I think part of that is something that you can answer, and then I'll be happy to answer anything that you would like to pass back to me.
I don't think that any decisions have been made. So our focus this year, as last year, has been to focus on vacant lines. This will be the first time that we have had to really think about if it's not vacant lines, what are we going to do? I'm not saying that we haven't tried to prepare without thinking about people by looking at programs, examining programs, trying to figure out where efficiencies could be made. But the actual concept of letting a faculty member go, I don't think that's happened in the 23 years that I've been at UCO. This is new territory for all of us. I know it's not comforting to you at this moment, as I sit here, to not be able to articulate what that may look like, but I would ask you to please understand that this is as new to your leadership as it is to you. And this is why we will have those discussions, those horrible, horrible discussions beginning next week with the contingency that I've mentioned to talk through all of those things. What is this going to look like? And we will be very, very carefully, any recommendations that come out of this division will be very carefully in alignment with the faculty handbook and the Russo policy. That is the only way that I know to lead those of you who know me well know that I'm a rule follower. I care a lot about following process as it exists, and I've spent a lot of time with the faculty handbook, with Russo policy in my previous roles as associate VP, as dean, as associate dean, as department chair. So any recommendations that we have will be as a group, and it will be in alignment with the policies as we know it. And it will be the other thing that any of you who know me know, it will be as humane as it possibly can be, because that's who I am. Thank you.
So I will offer, I believe the other part of it was, will there be severance offered? And absolutely, yes, there will be. Just as there was severance offered last year, there will be severance offered this coming year. And so where appropriate, severance is going to be significant and helpful to help people bridge that gap between leaving here and finding something else. Of course, that package is going to include the benefits to help make sure their family, they and their family are covered with health insurance for an extended period of time. And so those, pardon me, the details of that are being fleshed out with the leaders, such as the provost and the vice president for people and culture, who will be helping the HR department work with you in order to get those packages prepared and ready. But absolutely, there will be severance. Did I answer the question fully, Deirdre, or is there more to it?
No, thank you. There still seems to be a little bit of ambiguity and a lot of questions on will these positions be cut by the end of this year or in summer or more immediately? And so there's a lot of individuals who are kind of trying to figure out the timing. And if we don't know right now, when will we know the timing on that?
Provost, I'm going to defer to you on that one, if you would.
So, as a provost and vice president for academic affairs, I am a recommender and not a decision maker. So it is not the case that I can say to you, this is the timeline and this is what will happen. I can tell you that as I look at the faculty handbook and Russo policy, my interpretation and that I have shared with my fellow cabinet members is that we are past the March 15th deadline. And so the standard thing to do is to extend the contract by 1 year, let people know, extend the contract by 1 year, and give them the option of it having be effective not next year, but the following year. That is my interpretation. I cannot tell you, I am a recommender, I'm not a decision maker. So I can tell you how my interpretation is for Russo policy. I cannot speak to what the final decision will be as those are made. I'm not the final say, as I think many of you know, so.
Okay, we have a couple questions in how will tenure be affected in these position eliminations?
Provost, I think that's for you as well.
So I think there's a couple of areas that you're asking about when you speak to that question. I think I also saw tenure and promotion. So those of you who are set for promotion, there has been absolutely no discussion, nor did you hear the president mention it today. There's been no discussion of withholding a promotion. So if you were approved for a promotion, then you've already received a letter from me that the president is recommending that to the Russo board. And even though we haven't gotten final approval, that meeting has already occurred. So I believe that tentatively those have been approved. So this is not impacting your ability to be promoted. That too would not change our faculty student ratio. So that's not a consideration. If you're asking, will faculty in tenured roles be considered as part of this elimination, that is a question that I cannot definitively say that you wouldn't be. The President has articulated in her remarks the idea that programs might not need to be phased out. If that is the case, if that is something that our group brings forward as a recommendation, then we would follow the faculty handbook and Russo policy very carefully in any recommendation that we make. As you all that are familiar with the handbook know, there are many protections offered by that document. And so we would make sure that any recommendations that come from this division are in alignment with those policies.
Thank you. I will say we're getting close to time. I'll try to get a couple more questions in very quickly. We are taking note of all of your questions that were not answered, and we will find a way to get these answers to you. Also, as the President mentioned, we have the QR code for the feedback form. We'll also send that out via email probably later today so that you'll have that feedback form to submit some of your comments as you think of them. One other question that came up several times is clarification on the statement optimizing full-time faculty and the capacity to take on more of a teaching load. Can we get a little bit of clarification on what that means?
Sure, I'll start, and then if the provost wants to clarify any, it's just a way to say if there is capacity for full-time faculty to do more teaching within their typical load, that's what we would ask them to do if it's possible. And then we're looking at available capacity. We're not talking about adding, we're not demanding overload. We are talking about optimizing what's available to us. The provost would have better, more direct answers about what that means, the mechanics behind it, but this is not about a forced overload. This is just about optimizing what may be available that we haven't done so far. Provost, did I explain that appropriately, or is there something else to add?
Yes, and I would say that my interpretation of that is that, we're going to have to look as a division, and that's going to be obvious to all of you, that if we've eliminated 40 faculty lines in addition to the 18 from last year, that smaller class sizes, those kinds of things are going to be much more difficult to have. So low enrollment classes are going to be, in my view, have to be reviewed very, very carefully to make sure that we're doing the most that we can for our students, as well as reassignment time will have to be reviewed very carefully to make sure that we are using our resources as optimally as we possibly can. That's what I interpret when I see that charge, President.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think we are at time. Thank you for all of your questions. Again, we have been taking note of the ones that were not answered live during this forum. And again, please go ahead and scan the feedback form, or later today you can use the link in the email. Thank you, President, and thank you, Provost, and the other guests who were on this forum call. Have a good day, and thank you for attending.